Well, it turns out time travel is evidently possible because somehow we have just been transported back into 2018. I don't know how this happened, but the controversy that Pope Francis allegedly used a witch's sting from 2018 is somehow resurfacing. I don't know how. I don't know why. I don't know where this is coming from, but I got people asking me about it. I got patrons asking me about it. I've been seeing it come up on social media again. So, since people are talking about it again, we're going to take a look at it and see, did Pope Francis use a witch's sting? If you're not familiar with what a witch sting is, um, if you've ever seen Lord of the Rings, you know the staff that Gandalf has, you shall not pass, and all that, and he uses the staff for witchcraft or whatever he does in the movie. Well, that is what a witch's stang is. It's used in witchcraft. It's that staff that they use. Well, we're going to take a look at that. Then I want to talk about Cardinal Fernandez, who recently came out and made some statements again on female deacons. So we're still seeing this topic being discussed in the news. So we'll take a look at that. After that, briefly, we will look at Vatican news that informs us that the Vatican has approved of the China deal, or renewed the China deal. And then shortly after that, I want to take a look at something from the Jerusalem Post on a family of a Christian soldier who fell in Gaza, who was asked, the family was asked to remove the cross that is on his headstone. So they're saying you can't have that cross in this Jewish cemetery. And so they're asking for that to be removed. We'll take a look at all of that today, but beginning first and foremost with the witch's sting controversy. Again, don't know how we got here, but here we are. We're going to do it. Before we dive in, though, let me remind you, please hit that subscribe button. I would really, really appreciate your support of this channel. So if you've been benefiting from the content, go ahead, do your part, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Really appreciate that. Well, back in 2018, we started to see all kinds of headlines about the Pope is now using a witch's sting. Um, to open up the 2018 synod, and also during various audiences and liturgies and so on and so forth. Instead of using a normal crozier, he was allegedly using this stang. Let me maybe share my screen and kind of show you what I'm talking about here. Um, should be able to see it right around now. This is what we're referring to here. So again, instead of using a normal crozier, we have this thing going on. We're going to see here in a moment what it is and also what it isn't. But I recall this post from 2018 from Father Z on Z's blog, where he was talking about it October 2018 on the 5th. So let's briefly take a look at it just to introduce you to what was going on in 2018, what people were saying, what the controversy was, and what people are now talking about again when they're bringing this up in 2024. Okay, that stick as a witch's stang thing isn't going away, he says. In my email, come photos of the moment that young people gave that stick to Francis. And there it is. You can see that same thing, the same image I just showed you, being presented to him here. And then Father Z says, not the red knotted string. No big deal. Maybe not. The red string on the wrist is something from Wicca, in effect, a form of Satanism. So he's saying the person handing the stang to him, that, people are concerned that this is somehow a Wicca adherent handing it to him. He says, I suppose it is possible to dismiss this. But father, you might be tempted to giggle. It's hot, just a little piece of string. What are you? Some sort of scaredy cat. He says, not that I have anything against cats, mind you. I'm not a species like you. That string, even It is, I guess he should have said, even if it did have to do with Wicca, what of it? I'll bet she saw some pop. I guess he meant star, but he writes start, wear it. And that's why she does too. I suppose he wrote this in a hurry, but even it, I guess he meant if she were into Wicca, so what? All faiths are good and love is never wrong, right? But you think that Wicca is wrong and that red strings are demonic and the other thing because you hate the Vatican too. Okay. So he says, friends, it could be that this young skull full of mush had no idea that that Wiccan thing is a Wiccan thing. Or it could be just what it looks like. A young person wearing a Wiccan symbol gave a staff that had a sort of Christian image on it while giving every impress that it is a satanic sting. What alarms me is that he later uses it at a mass. Is there no one near Francis who investigates things like this? Hey, that thing doesn't look right to me before something blows up. Maybe we had better. What do young people say now? Gaggle at it. Oh, okay. So that's a reference to Google. Or if someone did investigate, here is the video of the event where the thing was handed to him. So he had, shows a little video clip of it. And then provides some photos. And here you can see it again. So a lot of people are saying, oh, well, this is clearly a witch's staff, a stang. But then he has an update. So there's a story in Spanish about the meaning of the stick thing that Francis had the other day. It might just look like a stang used in satanic rituals, but it was I guess he meant a gift, from young people intended to be Jesus crucified with arms joined by a nail and sculpted in the shape of a bamboo. Um, I mean, let's zoom in on it. Okay. Now, clearly, you got a nail here. You got two, you know, arms here, and then there's something here in the middle. You zoom in on it. That's the face, right? So this is supposed to be the face of Jesus with two arms going up and nails through it. Not the most beautiful staff that I've ever seen, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. But evidently that's the intention here, is that this is a depiction of Jesus with his two arms up and a nail through it depicting the crucifixion. So that is what he is referring to when he says the description is supposed to be Jesus crucified with arms joined by a nail and sculpted in the shape of bamboo. And in the torn heart of Jesus on the cross is guarded a small seed, that seed that dies to bear fruit in our hope, and it reveals the secret to make life flourish. Love, said the young woman, explaining the meaning of the staff. And here you can see another picture of it. And again, the opening of the 2018 Synod on synodality. He says, so the 2018 synod begins. I found it interesting. He says, first impression, it looks like a V with a nail through it. VV Vegano, question mark. So a quick reference to Vigano, the disgraced Vigano, who has been excommunicated for schism at this point. So that appears to be the situation with the Pope's Stang, alleged Stang. It's supposed to be a crozier depicting Jesus with his two arms up and nails through it. Not the best depiction that I've ever seen of Jesus on the cross, mind you. Again, my opinion, I'm not a big fan of it, but evidently that was the purpose. But a lot of people took it as a witch's sting. Mind you, oddly enough, this wasn't just something that a few randoms on Twitter or Facebook at the time thought was a witch's sting. None other than Iden Nichols. Iden Nichols, the well-known Father Iden Nichols, Professor John Rist, John Lamont, Peter Kwasniewski, John Hunwick, Deacon Nick Donnelly, Father Thomas Crean. All sorts of people signed this little document here, I believe in 2019, accusing Pope Francis of all sorts of things, called Open Letter to the Bishops of the Catholic Church. And take a wild guess, one of the things they accuse him of. Yeah. At the opening mass of the Synod on Youth in 2018, Pope Francis carried a staff in the form of a stang, an object used in satanic rituals. That's what they were. They were bringing out big guns against Pope Francis with this one. So it wasn't just a bunch of randoms in 2018 and 2019. You had none other than Father Iden Nichols, among others, making this accusation. Wild stuff. But there it is. Hopefully that helps provide a little bit of context, though, the next time you open up Twitter and you see people saying Pope Francis used a witch's stang. Now you have all of the information. All right, let's shift gears here and talk about Cardinal Fernandez and more discussions on the diaconate and female deacons. Keeps coming up in the news, right? We thought it was over, thought there weren't going to be any more discussions. And yet every week, as the weeks go by, we still see more comments about this in the news. Before we dive in, though, for those of y'all just now tuning in, welcome to the show. Hey, hit that subscribe button for me. I would really appreciate your support. Let me share my screen. Let's take a look at it. So Cardinal Fernandez, head of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. Diaconate is not today, so it's still a no. Surprise, right? Of course it's still a no. But there's some people still holding on to dear life in the hopes that they're going to get this pushed through. Now, I've shown you on previous videos how there were female deaconesses in the Latin Church unto the second millennium, how in the Eastern Church there still are some female deacons in Eastern Orthodoxy, in Oriental Orthodoxy. In many aspects of the East, you've had this. I've even pointed out ecumenical councils, like the Council of Chalcedon, the Fourth Ecumenical Council, that has canons on the ordination of female deaconesses through the laying on of hands. I've gone over that particular canon multiple times. And I've explained some of the controversies surrounding the question, is this a sacramental ordination? Is this some form of ordination through the laying on of hands and the invocation of the Holy Spirit, but not a sacramental ordination? Well, that controversy rages unto today, but Cardinal Fernandez says there is not sufficient basis for a sacramental ordination of females to the diaconate. So he is continuing to assert this is not for today. This is not something that is going to be affirmed. He keeps emphasizing that the synod on synodality, this isn't what we need to be focusing on. There's other things that need to be addressed. So this issue of female deaconesses does not need to be what the synod fathers need to be discussing. So yeah, we're going to take a look at his comments. Let's see what he says. He was actually missing from a meeting not long ago, and I think that may have triggered this discussion because they were wanting to meet with him to have that discussion with him, and he wasn't there. So I think that may have what led to this in the news. I don't know, kind of speculation. Okay, Cardinal Fernandez on Monday reaffirmed Pope Francis's position against women's access to the diaconate. You remember that video that he had with 60 Minutes where she asks him, hey, will a woman ever be ordained even to the diaconate? And he just leans forward and says, no, and just leans back, and that was it. So Fernandez reaffirms Pope Francis's no on female deacons, an issue that will continue to be evaluated by a specialized commission while the Synod on Synodality continues to reflect on the role of women in the church outside of ordained ministry. During his speech at the General Congregation on October 21st, the prefect for the dicastery recalled that for the Holy Father, the question of the female diaconate is not ripe. And for this reason, he specifically asked the members of the synod not to get sidetracked on this possibility now. In other words, the purpose of the synod on synodality is not to hammer out questions like the female diaconate and whether or not it should be brought back to the Catholic Church and whether it is sacramental or not. That is not the purpose of the synod on synodality. No point in getting derailed here. So he's trying to say, look, this is just a rabbit trail. We need to stop doing this. However, the cardinal indicated that those who are convinced that it is necessary to go deeper into the question can send their considerations to the commission established by the Holy Father in 2020 to further study the subject. So they can just send their questions there. The commission is chaired by Cardinal Petroshi. In a similar way to what he said at the beginning of the Synod, Fernandez emphasized that rushing to ask for the ordination of deaconesses is not today the most important response to promote women. However, he underscored that the pontiff is very concerned about the role of women in the church and therefore called for further reflection without concentrating on holy orders. In other words, what roles can women serve in the church today outside of the question of sacramental ordination? Fernandez referred once again to the reflections led by Group 5, because there's different groups. I think there's 10 or 11 groups at the Synod. Well, Group 5 is what he's referring to, charged during the Synod with exploring, among other things, the question of the necessary participation of women in the life and leadership of the church. He pointed out that this group has analyzed different forms, such as the lay ministry of catechists in communities without priests, an option that emerged after Pope Francis's synod on the Amazon and was not widely accepted. The document in question was Caridia Amazonia. The prelate recalled that Pope Francis has pointed out that priestly power linked to the sacraments is not necessarily expressed as power or authority, and that there are forms of authority that do not require holy orders. Continuing his reflection, he renewed his invitation to send to the dicastery testimonies of women who are truly community leaders or who perform important functions of authority. He says, I ask especially the women members of this synod to help collect, explain, and send to the dicastery various proposals, which we can hear in their context, on possible paths for the participation of women in the leadership of the church. Likewise, after the misunderstanding that was caused by his absence, this is what I was talking about earlier, absence from a meeting of synod delegates in which they interacted with the Vatican study group on this issue, the cardinal confirmed that there will be a new meeting on Thursday, October 24th, which will be tomorrow, 4:30 p.m. local time. I almost said central because I'm so used to saying central. Local time, where he will listen to ideas and proposals. Okay. He also expressed his hope that concrete steps can be taken to understand that there is nothing in the nature of women that prevents them from occupying very important positions in the guidance of the churches. What truly comes from the Holy Spirit cannot be stopped. Well, I mean, think of this: Empress Irene, calling the Seventh Ecumenical Council and being a very central figure at the Seventh Ecumenical Council. There's an instance of women leadership in the church that is clearly not sacramental in nature. Although, oddly enough, a lot of people in the first millennium did see the installment of an emperor as quasi-sacramental in nature. Okay. All right, so draft of final documents already in the hands of synod members. So they already have a draft of the final document. This is interesting because a lot of people I've heard often say stuff like, "Wait, what? They already have the final draft in the synod? Isn't even over yet." Um, it's important to be aware that often a lot of these things, there is a rough draft written before the meeting even begins, before the synod even begins. Not unusual, since that's also what has often happened with, for instance, ecumenical councils. Like at Vatican II, a lot of the working documents were written before Vatican II even assembled. Now, they threw out all of those working documents and started over, but it's very common to have a rough draft and working documents before the assembly even begins. And that has happened with ecumenical councils. How much more could it happen with something that's not even authoritative and magisterial, such as a synod of bishops? So don't let people try to spin that and say, well, see, look, they're already coming up with the outcome before the thing even began. You mean like they did with the Fifth Ecumenical Council, where the emperor came up with the outcome of the entire ecumenical council before it even began? You mean like that? Be consistent with your objections to what is going on here, because it might turn out that some of your objections to the synod on synodality come back to bite you if you study the history of the ecumenical councils, which, by the way, I do have a course on, not only with Catholic Polytechnic University, but I'm also doing for my patrons a course on the first 7 ecumenical councils. If you participate at the gold level on Patreon, gold level or above, you'll get access to those lectures on the ecumenical councils. I really think that we need to know them, because it would help put a lot of things into perspective. And it would also show that a lot of the objections that you see floating around on the internet today, even made by Catholics, we're not even just talking about Protestants, we're talking from Catholics. A lot of the objections from Catholics aren't good ones because they aren't aware of the history of the church, especially with the ecumenical council. So certainly check that out. It's patreon.com/reason and theology. Join from the gold level or above, and you'll get access to them. Okay, so let's move on to the next story here. The Holy See and the China deal being extended. Let me again remind those of y'all who are just now tuning in, if you appreciate reason and theology, do your part, hit that subscribe button, and the like button helps out tremendously. Please do that. You know, we haven't seen the China deal. We don't know what it actually says. We don't know what the terms are, this agreement between the Vatican and the Chinese government on the question of the appointment of bishops. They have come to an agreement on it, but we don't know what it is because it hasn't been made public. We do know, however, it was just renewed. So there was some speculation on whether or not that agreement was going to be renewed. And yep, news is official. Vatican News is confirming whatever the deal is, it was renewed. So Holy See and China extend provisional agreement on appointment of bishops. After appropriate consultation and assessment, the Holy See and the People's Republic of China have agreed to extend the provisional agreement on the appointment of bishops for another 4 years. So it's provisional, 4 years they can negotiate again. In light of the consensus reached for an effective application of the provisional agreement regarding the appointment of bishops after appropriate consultation and assessment, the Holy See and the People's Republic of China have agreed to extend further its validity for 4 years from the present date, according to a communique released by the Holy See's press office on Tuesday, yesterday. The Vatican Party, the statement continues, remains dedicated to furthering the respectful and constructive dialogue with the Chinese government in view of the further development of bilateral relations for the benefit of the Catholic Church in China and the Chinese people as a whole. This is the third renewal of the agreement that, with the signing on the 22nd September 2018, opened a historic chapter in relations between the Holy See and the People's Republic of China, and within the church itself in China, allowing all bishops to be in full hierarchical communion with the Pope. So prior to this agreement, there were some bishops who were not in communion and some who were. This ensured that the bishops could be in full communion. The new signature affixed by both parties on the provisional agreement extends its validity for another 4 years and follows the first renewal for a 2-year period, which took place 2 years ago on 2020. The provisional agreement ended decades of episcopal ordination without papal consent. This kind of goes back to the investiture controversy, right? We often saw this with emperors trying to appoint bishops. I mean, think of Photius, the emperor right before the Eighth Ecumenical Council removes Ignatius, Patriarch of Constantinople, and then puts in Photius. And so the Eighth Ecumenical Council is called to address the issue with Photius. Photius is anathematized by the Pope and the Council. Oddly enough, Photius later on in his life comes back into communion with Rome and dies in the Catholic Church. And now he's venerated as a Catholic in the Eastern Catholic Churches. So a man who was anathematized by an ecumenical council is now a saint in the Catholic Church. It's, I think, an interesting point of history, but we've seen this issue with the investiture controversies. We saw it again later on in the 11th century. We saw some of the Lateran councils fighting against the Holy Roman Emperor, who was trying to appoint bishops, and the Pope says, no, you can't do that. We even saw this with the Byzantine papacy period, where emperors were appointing popes. So a pope was not made a pope without the consent of and without the approbation of an emperor for quite some time. It's called the Byzantine papacy. So there has often been this issue of the state interfering in the affairs of the church, and the church has had to come out time and time again saying, no, the church is the one that has the authority to appoint these bishops. So similarly, with that issue, historically, you have this situation going on with China. So to rectify that deal and to give full communion to these bishops, there is this China deal. We don't know what the provisions are. We don't know what the agreement is. So it's kind of hard to criticize it because I see a lot of people criticizing it, but I can't criticize something I haven't seen and nobody else has seen except for a very few people in the Vatican. So until we know what the terms are, I can't really tell you if it's a good deal or a bad deal. I can't weigh in on it one way or another. It would be foolish to do so. Okay, so continuing here with the article, the provisional agreement ended decades of episcopal ordinations without papal consent, leading to a radically changed scenario in the last 6 years. Since then, about 10 bishops have been appointed and consecrated, and Beijing officially recognized the public role of several previously unrecognized bishops. A sign of the new cooperation is also evidenced by the presence of bishops from mainland China at synods in the Vatican and other meetings in Europe and America, as well as that of young people at last year's World Youth Day in Lisbon, and the general participation of Chinese faithful and apostolic journeys made by Pope Francis in the East in recent years. So that's all we got on it right now. If there's more information that comes out on the China deal, I'll be sure to do a show, but that's what we know so far. It was renewed. Still don't know what the terms are. Hard to evaluate it. It is what it is. All right, shifting gears one last time here. I want to take a look at something that I saw from the Jerusalem Post. It actually came up on my Twitter, and I was intrigued by the headline because here's what it says. Family of Christian soldier who fell in Gaza asked to remove cross from his headstone. So this is an IDF soldier who was Christian, who died in Gaza. They bury him in Israel in a Jewish cemetery, and they had a cross on his headstone, and now they're asking, remove that cross. Let's see what it says. The defense ministry is attempting to reach an agreement with the family of Sergeant David Bogdanovsky, who fell in battle in the south of the Gaza Strip in December, to remove a cross from his headstone. I mean, I can tell you, when I lived in Israel, a cross, at least in the parts that I lived in, was the worst thing you could depict. It was 1,000 times worse than dropping the F-bomb in public. It so much so that in school, we did not have a cross for the plus symbol. Instead of a cross, the plus symbol was an upside down T. So a line, vertical line here, and a horizontal line underneath it, but it doesn't go through all the way. It doesn't actually make a cross. It's just a T upside down. Why? Because so many associate, even though they're wrong in this association, so many in Israel associate Christianity with the Holocaust and with all sorts of Jewish persecution. Now, you might say, oh, that's entirely unfair. Perhaps, but that's the reality. Okay. Okay, so it's something that a lot of people consider offensive, and I think that's probably behind some of this here. They see it as offensive. In fact, they're saying that this is something that makes the cemetery unsacred, the presence of the cross. By law, it is not permissible to place a cross on any or other religious marker on a military headstone, the military said. This is especially important in the Haifa Military Cemetery, where fallen Jewish soldiers are also buried. So actually, it's a military seminary, not a Jewish cemetery per se. Military cemetery with some Jewish soldiers buried there. And it cites a ruling by the IDF chief rabbi that states the holiness of the Jewish cemetery is harmed by the cross. So, some are saying, some of these rabbis are saying, no, you can't do it. And that's the purpose behind this law here. So the ministry said it is working with the Public Committee for Soldier Memorial to reach an agreement with the family in light of requests by families whose loved ones are buried nearby, who claim that the cross hurts their feelings and their ability to pray and say the Kaddish, the morning prayer, and in light of the ruling of the IDF chief rabbi. I just have to say this. Personally, if there is a sign nearby on some other grave, I don't really care what the sign says. It doesn't interfere with my prayers, and my skin is thick enough to not have my feelings hurt by being in the presence of a symbol that I might not agree with. Even a symbol, if I think it's a hurtful, even if I think the symbol is hateful and hurtful, uh, I might still say, well, you know what? I'm an adult and I'm grown enough to not really be bothered by this. Just that's me personally. Evidently, some people feel differently and their feelings are hurt. Um, so they're saying can't have that. The defense ministry mourns with the family of a fallen soldier, and will continue to accompany the family and all bereaved families. The defense ministry is working and will work sensitively with all sides, and we hope that we can reach an agreement and solution as soon as possible. Well, look, here's reality. Okay, here's reality. There are people in the world who don't share your religious views. Okay, whatever your religious views, whoever's watching this show, I know we have all sorts of people watching. Whatever your religious views are, there are people in the world who don't share your religious views. There are people in the world who might even think really bad things about you. And you might think really bad things about them. And you might think bad things about their religion, and they might think bad things about your religion. And whenever you live in society, you're going to have to be around those people. And it is such that you might, especially if you go to a military cemetery, you might encounter symbols and religious, um, depictions on various graves that you don't agree with. That's life. That's life. I'm sorry. People can only go so far to accommodate others, right? But this almost feels like those who want, people to use the pronouns that they believe they should be identified with despite reality. It kind of feels that way. It's like, a person who is a biological male who identifies as a woman, requiring everyone else to call them, she, her, and all that. And if you don't do that, there's going to be some legal penalties here. It kind of feels like that, to be honest with you. And I just have to say, grow up, grow up. Other graves had religious markers, it says. The family said that other graves in the cemetery have religious markers on them. The Christian residents of Haifa made Aliyah in 2014, so he moved to Israel from Ukraine, according to Khan. He served in the Combat Engineering Corps. How did he make Aliyah as a Christian? Did he make Aliyah as a Jew and then later on converted to Christianity, or didn't just go like? I'm curious about that. How do you make Aliyah as a Christian? Maybe he wasn't Christian at the time when he did. I don't know. But that is curious. Earlier this month, Bogdanovsky's mother visited his grave and found that his headstone had been covered in black cloth while a ceremony was taking place for those killed on October 7th. So here's my thing, okay? It kind of goes both ways, right? So let's say you have some Jewish people there who are doing their prayers, morning prayers for, their lost loved one, okay? And so they cover another Christian grave with a black cloth because they feel that cross is offensive to them. It hurts their feelings. Well, what about the mother of this Christian who comes to visit her son's grave, and her son's grave is covered with a black cloth? Doesn't that hurt her feelings? I'm just saying, like, it is a two-way street here. It goes both ways. It- just saying. And there are some Christians who would be offended by a Star of David on, a Jewish grave or something like that. I want to tell those Christians, get a life, grow up, get some thicker skin, move on, go about your business. But there's some Christians who have hurt feelings over the presence of those things. So it's a two-way street, right? So does that mean that all the Jewish graves have to, they have to remove a Star of David or something? That's also ridiculous, right? I think that people just need to grow up. But it continues. I don't have words to describe the humiliation I felt, she said. Fair enough. I thought that my David, who gave his life to the country, who loved the country with all his heart for 9 years since his Aliyah, who joined the IDF to defend me, his family, and all of us, is no different um, than any of the other guys, and is not a second class citizen. I mean, so he died, right? He died for the state of Israel, and yet he's kind of being treated as a second class citizen. I stood there and cried with anger, frustration, and not understanding, she said. Okay, well, I do know people who are Christians in Israel who say the same thing. They feel like they're second class citizens, and they've given me a lot of examples on how they are treated as second class citizens, as citizens of Israel, but as Christians. And so this seems to be something that I'm seeing a lot of from Christians in Israel. They often point out and make this exact same observation that they feel like they're second class citizens. And perhaps this is an example of that. And I kind of have to think, okay, I really think the state of Israel is going to have to think through this a little bit more carefully. If this soldier, the Christian soldier, is good enough to die for their state and to defend their state in military, surely they're good enough to have their religious identity expressed on their own grave, right? I mean, you can't just use this person as a body to die for your state, but then completely ignore their religious identity. And look, if they're good enough to fight for you, then you should at least respect their religious views and not try to hide them. So, I just thought, wow, that's a pretty wild story. I don't know what the resolution is going to be there. Um, I honestly think at the end of the day, what's going to have to happen here is drop that law, remove that from law, and tell people, grow up. Are you kidding me? That's what needs to be said here. And move on. If somebody calls and complains, say, move on, grow up. This is the real world. You have to put your big girl panties on or big boy underwear on, whatever the expression is. You get it. Anyways. Hopefully, y'all enjoyed this show. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I really, really would appreciate your support of the channel. So if you have benefited from the content here, go ahead and do your part by hitting the sub button. If you want to get access to my patron-only course on the ecumenical councils. To learn more about them, go to patreon.com/reason and theology. Join the gold level or above, and you'll get access to them. So, all right, that's going to do it. See y'all tomorrow. God bless.